town of Blackwood had always been quiet, the kind of place where life moved at an unhurried pace. The train station, a relic from another era, still stood in the heart of the town, its old wooden beams darkened with time. Though few people passed through anymore, the schedule remained fixed, its faded letters marking the routine departures and arrivals. One autumn evening, as the mist rolled in thick from the hills, station attendant Gregory Marsh glanced at the schedule board. His eyes traced the familiar times, the 6:15 to Holloway, the 8:05 to Millbank. But then they landed on something unusual, 11:45 p.m., route unknown. His brows knit together. There had never been an 11:45 train, not once in the station's history. He turned toward the ticket office, where old Mr. Henshaw, the night clerk, dozed in his chair. The man had worked there for decades. If anyone knew about an unscheduled train, it would be him. But when Gregory tapped the schedule, Mr. Henshaw's face paled. His lips parted as if he were about to speak, but instead, he shook his head and looked away. Gregory pressed for an answer, but the old man only muttered something about mistakes in the system and refused to meet his eye. Gregory couldn't let it go. He checked the station's records, leafing through pages of scheduled departures. There was no mention of an 11:45 train. Not in the past, not in the future. And yet, there it was, printed on the station's display, as if it had always been there. A cold unease settled in his gut. As the night deepened, the station grew eerily quiet. The usual stragglers had long since left, and only the buzzing of the flickering platform lights filled the silence. Gregory kept glancing at the clock. 11:40 p.m. Outside, the mist thickened, curling through the air like smoke. The street lamps cast long, trembling shadows across the platform. 11:42 p.m. The tracks remained empty. No distant rumble, no approaching headlamps cutting through the dark. Then, at exactly 11:45 p.m., the station trembled. A sudden, violent gust of wind swept through the platform, rattling the windows. The air grew heavy, thick with something unseen. And then, the train appeared. It wasn't like any other train that passed through Blackwood. The carriages were long, black, and gleaming, their metal bodies untouched by rust or time. There was no number, no logo, just smooth, endless black. The wheels made no sound as they rolled in, stopping with an eerie precision. The doors hissed open. At first, the platform remained still, empty, silent. Then, people stepped forward. Gregory felt his breath catch. Where had they come from? He hadn't seen a single soul arrive at the station, yet now there were passengers boarding. Figures in dark coats, their faces obscured. They moved without hesitation, without speaking. Their footsteps made no sound. A young woman, Eleanor Finch, hesitated at the edge of the platform. She had arrived late, intending to catch the last train home. But she too had never seen an 11:45 departure before. She clutched her ticket, heart hammering. The train seemed wrong, but something about it pulled at her. She took a step forward. Gregory wanted to call out, to stop her, but his voice caught in his throat. As she stepped onto the train, her figure melted into the dim interior. The doors whispered shut behind her. A low, distant whistle sounded. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the train vanished into the mist. There was no screech of wheels, no rhythmic clatter on the tracks. Just an absence, an emptiness where it had been. And in the silence that followed, the schedule board changed. The 11:45 p.m. listing faded, gone, as if it had never been there. knew what he had seen, and somewhere deep in his bones he understood. The train had not gone to any place known to man. It had gone somewhere else, and those who had boarded would never return. The silence inside the train was unnatural. Eleanor Finch felt it immediately as she stepped into the dimly lit carriage. The air was thick, stale, carrying an odd scent. Not quite dust, not quite decay, but something in between. She hesitated just beyond the door, expecting the hum of an engine, the rhythmic sway of movement. But the train was deathly still. Then, the doors sealed shut behind her. A cold wave of unease passed through her. There were no announcements, no conductors, no indication of their destination. Just the soft, almost imperceptible lurch of movement as the train pulled away. She turned toward the nearest window, needing some point of reference. But outside, there was only darkness. Not the kind of darkness that came from traveling through the countryside at night. No trees, no distant station lights, not even the faint outline of the horizon. Just a void, endless and absolute. The sight sent a ripple of dread through her. She pressed her palm to the glass, trying to make sense of it. Surely she had just boarded a normal train. Surely there was some logical explanation. And yet, when she turned back to the carriage, she realized something even worse. The other passengers, the ones who had boarded alongside her, were all staring at her. They sat in stiff, upright postures, their faces pale and emotionless. Their clothes were outdated like something from another time. A man in a dark suit and bowler hat, a woman in an old-fashioned dress, a child clutching a tattered doll. Their eyes never blinked. She swallowed, forcing herself to move. She chose an empty seat near the door, but her body remained tense. The train rumbled forward, gliding smoothly over the tracks. The lights flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows along the walls. The air inside the carriage seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, pressing against her lungs. Eleanor stole another glance at the passengers. Some had shifted their gazes, staring instead at their laps or the empty seats in front of them. But a few still watched her, their eyes black and hollow. She reached into her coat pocket, fingers brushing against her phone. The thought of calling someone, anyone, was a desperate grasp for normalcy. She pressed the power button. No signal. The screen flashed white for a second, then filled with the static. She blinked. That wasn't normal. Even underground trains had at least a weak connection. She tapped the screen, but the static remained. For a fraction of a second, a distorted image flickered across the screen. A blurred face, eyes sunken, mouth twisted in a silent scream. Then the phone died. Her breath hitched. She turned her gaze back to the window, heart pounding. Maybe they had entered a tunnel. Maybe the darkness outside had an explanation. But as she stared into the abyss beyond the glass, something shifted. A shape. At first it was just a suggestion of movement, barely noticeable against the void. But then it pressed against the glass. A hand. Pale, skeletal fingers splayed against the window pane, pressing so hard the knuckles turned white. Then another hand, and another. Hands upon hands, stretching out of the darkness, clawing at the windows as if trying to get in. Eleanor jerked away, breath catching in her throat. She darted her gaze around the carriage, searching for some kind of reaction, but no one else moved. The passengers sat still, unbothered, as if they didn't see the thing outside, or worse, as if they were used to it. The train shuddered. The lights flickered more violently now, plunging the carriage into momentary darkness before buzzing back to life. The air grew colder. Eleanor could see her breath in front of her. The whispers began soon after, soft at first, barely perceptible, a murmur at the edge of hearing. But then they grew louder, too many voices speaking at once. Some were high-pitched, others deep and guttural. She squeezed her eyes shut. It was a trick of her mind. It had to be. Then something brushed against her arm. Her eyes snapped open, heart hammering. A woman, one of the passengers, had moved to the seat beside her. Her skin was waxen, her eyes black and bottomless. She leaned closer, lips parting as if to whisper something. Eleanor bolted from her seat. She stumbled into the aisle, breath ragged. She had to get out. The doors. Where were the doors? She turned wildly, searching for an exit, but the layout of the carriage had changed. The door she had entered through was gone. In its place, there was only more seating, more rows of passengers who hadn't been there before. Her pulse pounded in her ears. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. She ran. She didn't care where, as long as it was away. She dashed toward the next carriage, forcing the heavy door open. It slid aside with a groan, revealing another dimly lit compartment. More passengers, more silent, unmoving figures. More passengers, more silent, unmoving figures. She ran through them, pushing past seats, ignoring the way the figures twisted their heads to watch her pass. Another door, another carriage, and then another, and another. The train did not end. The carriages stretched on forever, repeating over and over, each one filled with more passengers, their faces increasingly wrong. Some had no mouths, just smooth, featureless skin where lips should be. Others had too many eyes, blinking in eerie synchronization. And the whispers grew louder. They weren't coming from the passengers anymore. They were coming from the walls. Eleanor's breath came in shallow gasps. She had to get off this train. She had to. Then, up ahead, she saw a figure standing in the aisle. Unlike the others, it wasn't sitting. It wasn't silent. It was waiting for her. A tall man in an old conductor's uniform. His face was obscured beneath the shadow of his cap, but his smile stretched too wide. He raised one hand and gestured. Not a wave, not a greeting, a beckoning. Come closer. Eleanor stopped. Her body refused to move. She wanted to scream, to turn, to run back the way she came, but her limbs were locked in place. The conductor stepped forward, slow, measured. The lights flickered wildly now, casting his figure in alternating bands of light and shadow. Behind him, the passengers began to rise. One by one, they stood from their seats, their movements jerky and unnatural. Eleanor finally found her voice. She turned, fleeing back toward the previous carriage. But as she did, something snagged her wrist. A hand. Thin, cold fingers wrapped around her skin. She jerked away, barely escaping the grasp. But as she stumbled backward, she saw it. Her own reflection in the window. Her own face. But something was wrong. The reflection of Eleanor didn't look frightened. It didn't look panicked. It was smiling. A slow, knowing smile. And as the train hurtled forward into the endless dark, the reflection raised a hand and waved, as if saying goodbye. The train roared forward, deeper into the void, a beast of metal and shadow, cutting through an abyss where time and place no longer mattered. Eleanor stumbled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. The reflection in the window, her own face, smiling, waving, still lingered in the glass, its expression eerily detached, as if it knew something she didn't. Her mind screamed for an escape. She turned, forcing herself to run again, pushing past the twisted, silent passengers who had risen from their seats. Their bodies were unnatural now, stiff faces stretched into unreadable masks. They watched her, empty eyes gleaming with something not quite human. The lights above flickered violently, plunging the train into split-second bursts of darkness. Each time they came back on, the scene shifted. The rows of seats weren't just filled with passengers anymore. They were filled with things. Figures half-formed, distorted, like people whose shapes had melted into the train itself. Some had arms that stretched too long, fingers curling into the floor. Others had no faces at all, just blank, smooth flesh. A few opened their mouths, or what should have been mouths, revealing gaping voids filled with static, whispering in languages long forgotten. Eleanor choked on her breath. She lunged toward the next door, slamming her hands against it. It refused to budge. Behind her, the passengers, the things, began moving toward her. Their footsteps were soundless, their bodies gliding as if they weren't bound by the laws of reality. A laugh, low, guttural, echoed from the front of the carriage. Eleanor's eyes darted toward it. The conductor. He was still there, still watching, his too wide smile stretching across his face. But now, in the flickering light, she could see what lay beneath his cap. His head wasn't right. The skin was peeled back, revealing something black, hollow, endless underneath. No bone, no muscle, just a gaping chasm, as if his head had been carved open to reveal the abyss itself. He lifted a gloved hand and gestured once more. "Come forward." Eleanor's breath came in ragged gasps. She had to escape. She wouldn't become part of this place. She turned to the nearest window, desperation taking hold. The outside world was nothing but darkness, but that had to be better than here. She slammed her fist into the glass. Once, twice. The window did not break. Then, for the first time, one of the passengers spoke. A rasping whisper carried on the stagnant air. "You are already inside." The words sent an electric chill through her spine. No, she wasn't. She was still herself. She was still real. Her reflection moved again. It tilted its head, but Eleanor had not moved. Then, it reached toward the glass, not from her side, from the other side. A pale hand pressed against the inside of the window, but it wasn't hers. It was the reflection's. The thing in the glass smirked, placing its other hand against the surface, then began to push through. The glass rippled like water. Eleanor recoiled as her own reflection began to crawl out. She screamed, stumbling backward as the figure, her doppelganger, her other self, emerged. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, its grin growing impossibly wide. And then it lunged. Eleanor barely had time to react before it collided with her, pulling her into the glass. For a moment, everything was cold. A crushing, suffocating cold. Her vision blurred, her mind unraveling into static and shadows. She wasn't in the train anymore. She was in the space between, floating in the abyss, surrounded by whispers and echoes. Faces swam around her, stretching, contorting. She could see herself. The other Eleanor, standing on the train, looking down at her with an almost pitying expression. Then, the reflection, her replacement, turned and walked away. The glass sealed shut. Eleanor screamed, pounding on the inside of the window, but no one saw her. She was on the other side now, trapped. The train rumbled forward, and in the carriage the passengers went back to their seats. The conductor gave a final nod, adjusting his cap, Eleanor, the new Eleanor, smiled softly, and the train, its destination unknown, continued through the endless dark, never stopping, never arriving, collecting more souls one by one, and in the windows behind the glass, the lost ones watched, screaming, unseen, forever.